Hi and welcome back to the Gemhawks YouTube channel. Thank you very much for continuing to join me here. Today I want to talk to you about freestanding trees. Now with wire work you can make pretty much anything you want to within reason. I've even seen a wirework beetle, a VW size beetle, which is really cool. But trees have been a long-standing theme of my work, and I've always wanted to share the 3D variation with you as well as the two-dimensional art or wall decor that I showed you a little while ago. I will just pop a little note up above to share that video tutorial with you now if you want to make a tutorial for a piece that can be worn as a pendant. I mean, I've sized them down to make earrings, but today is all about freestanding or 3D trees. So the first variation I'm just going to give you a slightly closer look at. This is my Four Seasons Tree of Life, which has clusters of gemstone chips in 4 different gems. And then this comes down to an all wirework freestanding base. I'm going to show you a variety of techniques today so that anything I show you will be achievable. So that's one of them. That's the Four Seasons. You can do it with any number of gemstones, any type of gemstones, as long as they're stable when wire goes through them. Second one I want to show you is a variety which is wire only. And this one is stood inside a Hag Stone. This was found down on Bognor Regis Beach a couple of years ago. A Hag Stone is where a variation of rock has formed in together and the softer rock has been worn away. And it is said that if you look through the hole in a Hag Stone, which I have filled with wire work on this instance, that you can see a different world altogether. So I collect Hag Stones, they're a beautiful thing. So that is one way that you can have your freestanding tree. This one, because I oriented it not overly well, sits inside just a little cubic zirconia ring that I happen to have knocking around. So that's displayed thusly. An alternative, which I think is really beautiful, and I'll show you how to achieve this today. This is another all wire tree. And on the one side you've got one variation of wire work, and on the other side it's come into blossom. Now this stands in a little cork. This could be, if you were taking a client's bespoke commission, this could be the cork from the champagne bottle at their first wedding, something like that. But really any cork will do, and as long as you're just using the wire and it's not too heavy, that is actually quite supporting. Some corks are cut slightly wonky, so maybe don't use those ones, but I will show you how to start off and create one of these as well. So with or without gemstones, if you like to, you can stand your freestanding trees on various bases. Now I tend to use coasters because they're already made to sit on people's furniture and they won't cause any damage. This is a wood slice which I picked up at a fair for about £2, about $3. It's just a slice of wood which has been nicely polished and lacquered. And then there's the ever popular slate coaster. Got from a supermarket, pack of 4 of them for again about £4, so not very much at all, around about $6 maybe. And those have got little feet on them so that it won't scratch the furniture for when you use this to display. So what I'd like to do now is take you through some of the techniques that you can use to create your very own tree designs. So what I'd like to do is just show you a little bit more closely the freestanding tree. This is the Four Seasons tree. And what I've done with this is I've clustered gemstone chips, and there's between 5 and 7 on each of those little branches. And really the art form in creating trees is more in the trunk than it is in the blossom, I think. So what I'm going to do is show you how to create a top-down tree to begin with, which means that we're going to start by adding some gemstones on, and then we'll work down to the bottom. So if I just pop that over in the corner for a second, what I have done is created several gemstone sticks. You may or may not be familiar with this technique. It's a very simple twisting technique. Now the majority of these are single gemstones on 0.4mm gauge wire, which is approximately 26 gauge. Some of these I've added a couple more gemstones on, so they make little leafy clusters. So there's a little bit of variation. Now the mistake I made is that I absolutely love labradorite, so I went with labradorite, but it's not the strongest gemstone. If it has fractures, you will split the bead whilst you're doing that twisting technique, which I'm about to show you. So think about what gemstone you'd like to use. Now, the length of wire that I'm using is around about 7 inches. That's slightly longer than we actually need, but it is the 26 gauge or 0.4 millimeter. So with that approximately 7 inches, I'm going to find the hole in my teeny tiny gemstone, and one of the cuts that looks really beautiful with this design are chips, gemstone chips. And it's a really affordable way to work this as well. But for today, I wanted to show you some labradorite, which I found on my bench, mysteriously appeared, and I just wanted to use them. So I found the centre-ish of that piece of wire. And what I'm doing is trying not to put too much stress on the wire at all, finding the middle, and just allowing that bead to sit down in a little bit of a U shape at the bottom there. And what I'm going to do is take one side of the wire over the top of the other and have them crossing over. And then it's like turning a key in a lock. You can run whichever direction you want to. So I'm going to use, to begin with, my non-dominant hand, and I'm just twisting that around whilst gently supporting the two wires that are coming in opposite directions between thumb and forefinger. You might like to use some of those little cotton gloves that you can get for your beauty routines to prevent your fingers from wearing out. In a moment I will show you the opposite technique which you can use, but it doesn't take terribly long, and it's something that you can achieve whilst you are doing other things. So if you're watching the telly, for instance, this is something you can do with your hands without paying too much attention. So the bead is suspended in the end, and we've now got a nice straight twist of wire. So I'm just going to trim away the very end section and just pop that in the scrap pot for now. Pop that on my pile of multiple gem sticks. We have the lovely noise of those here. And I'm just going to straighten out this approximately 7 inches of wire, grab myself another bead, pop that into position. Some people will do this with an electronic tool or a wire twisting tool. I like to do them by hand. What I'm going to do is grab my bent chain nose pliers. I'm just going to find that centre, create that U shape as we did before, cross those two wires over, and I'll get that started by hand. And you can use whichever hand you want. So just briefly to get that started, I'll show you this technique, which is to turn one by one. I find it much quicker to rotate the bead end. This is where having a strong gemstone will really help. So if that is problematic for you, what you can do is take those two wires a little bit closer together, and you can utilize your pliers to generate that twist. What I find with this is that you have less control over the spiraling that you're creating, but it is an option if that's the way that you would prefer to continue. So I'm just going to continue all the way along to the end. When you get to the end, you might find that last little bit tiny bit spiky, so you could just switch to the pliers for the last bit, because one of those wires is inevitably slightly shorter than the other and it can stick up a little bit. If that catches you in the thumb unawares, you might not enjoy it quite so much. So I've just trimmed away the end again, and now I've got a lovely bundle. They're all around about the same length. It doesn't really matter if they're not identical. I'm just going to put them bead down and give that a bit of a shake. Now, if you want your tree to be quite full and have all its leaves in the same position, then you have the opportunity to do that. But what I like to do is start off with a bundle which will create the crown of my tree, and just give that a little bit of a twist to begin with before I add in more of these other beads around the side in little clusters. You can, if you like, just give that a bit of a pre-twist near the top and then add that in and get that going, or you can just add it directly. Make sure they're all the same way up. You can add that directly to the trunk that you've started creating. What you do need to do is make sure that they're all moving in the same direction. So for me, it's right hand moving forwards and away from me over the top. I'm going to grab another little cluster of wires here. There's one naughty one stuck down in the middle there. Give that a little bit of a twist to get it started if you like. Pop that onto the other side, so they're starting to cascade down now, and bring that into position. Now this is where I generally start to bring in the pliers just a little bit. So I think that's probably quite enough branches for one tree. And what we would do is make sure that this is all very, very sturdy and stable and connected together, like so. One of the easiest things that you can do to create a freestanding tree without any kind of base is start bringing these roots, I suppose, out at the bottom, like so. And when I first started making the trees, this is how I would generate them all. Make sure that that is really, really strong in there. You can, if you like, put some tape around that to secure it and support it without losing any of the finish. And what we would then do is just put little coils on the end of all of these. I'll just grab my round nose pliers. Just pop some little coils on like so and make a decorative effect out of that base. And then you can allow that to sit over the surface of your chosen platform. And what I tended to do is use an epoxy 2-part glue to just make that sit down into position. Now, to open the top out, it's really a case of going quite slowly and just allowing those to almost blossom in quite a natural fashion. You may have a favourite tree. I particularly like the cedar of Lebanon, which is, I'm not trying to replicate it now, by the way, just in case you're thinking that's not a very good cedar of Lebanon. But there are different formations within trees, obviously, and you can play around with this to your heart's content. Now, because we didn't overstress the wire earlier, we do have quite an opportunity to move some of these wires around a little bit until that gives you the kind of shape that you're looking to generate. This is very, very hastily done. This has been done live with you here now. It hasn't had any editing. So just take your time a little bit more to get those leaves clustered how you would like them to. And then little coils on the end of all of these little root balls. Now, if you want to create a taller, larger tree, you will need around about 12 to 14 inches of the wire each time. And the system of adding the beads on is exactly the same, but you just add more than one bead on and support that as you do that twisting technique. So what I'm going to show you next is how you can create slightly different formations without any beads whatsoever. And I'll also show you an alternative way for fashioning those roots. So that's really quite stable, but you would obviously want to make sure that there were no jagged edges. I see there's a piece here that I didn't quite trim efficiently enough. So just make sure that there's no sticky outy bits. You put little coils on the end of each of those root systems, so that there's really nothing to catch. What I did start to do very, very far back is I'd pop a pebble right in the base of the tree to allow the glue to seep around the pebble and then bring those roots down over the top of the pebbles. I have actually given away or sold most of my trees, but that gives you an idea of what you can achieve really very quickly. So for my little almost bonsai-like style tree, there are no gemstones involved. I've set this into a Hag Stone, but you can set that however you wish to. What I've done is I've used my professional coiling gizmo to create a nice long length using 0.4mm or 26 gauge raw copper wire. I've created a really long length on quite a fine rod of the coiled gizmo, like so. And then I've trimmed them to around about 1 inch long, and I'll show you now how to generate the branches that come up to create this kind of style. So there's a slightly closer look at the tree itself. As I say, that root system goes down through the hole in the Hag Stone. I'll just pop that one up into the top corner for the moment. Now I'm using a slightly heavier wire for this. This is 0.56mm, which equates to 24 gauge, and I'm using around about 8 inches or so of that slightly heavier gauge of wire. The coil is made with the 0.4 or 26 gauge raw copper wire, around about 8 inches, and I've slipped on that inch or so of coiled material. Again, I'm going to find the centre. I'm just going to very gently start to curve that around. I'm going to use a very technical tool in a moment, and I'm sure that you will be able to find one. So carefully just bringing that round so we don't put a point in the end here. We're going to use that exact same twisting technique, but we're only going to use around about 1/2 inch or so to twist that down into position. draw those two wires together. It's around about 1/2 inch there, and you can, if you need to, just tidy and tighten that up with a pair of pliers. Technical tool for you now is the end of a pen, and what I'm going to do is just make that nice and round. I'll show you one more of those. They are so much fun to make, and again, you can mass produce them while you're sat doing not very much else, and you can feel not guilty because you're actually working hard. So finding the centre of my slightly heavier 0.56 24 gauge wire, bringing that around gently. The key here is to take your time so that you don't make a harsh bend in the coiled section. One side flips over the other side, and then we're going to give that a little bit of a twist for around about just under 1/2 inch, I would say. You can see that's gone slightly wonky, so that's fairly easy to just tidy up, and then draw those two tails of wire together. So the next thing we're going to make is a little leaf cluster. Forgot to roundinate it. There we go. So that's roundified the section here. Now you can have these leaves quite close together, or you can have them slightly more spread out. It's entirely up to you. I'm just going to cluster them to begin with, and then do a couple of twists by hand, and then I really do need to get those pliers in because I've used slightly heavier wire to make a slightly more substantial tree. The example here is done all in 0.4mm 26 gauge, so you get a slightly different look. So again, using the pliers, I'm just going to twist that up together so I've got a really good grip on those little sections. And then what I want to do is bring them all together. So I've done them in batches of 3. Just because I think it looks nice. You can do as many or as few as you like. Now for this design, I don't want them all to be the same height, so I'm just going to add them in one at a time, like so. Small gap between the top and the next one. Start that a couple of twists, just tighten that up. I'm not going too far down before I add the next one in, and they're quite resilient. So I'm just going to put the next one on the other side, start to twist that around. Couple of turns with the pliers here, like so, and you can see already that you can have lots of fun forming this how you want your personal tree to be. So this is almost a clover-ish type shape, so I'm just going to continue adding that round the trunk as it almost creates itself, really. Couple of little twists to get that going before I add in some pliers strength, and you will slightly squash these as you go, but that's absolutely fine, and you'll be able to make this exactly how you see fit as you move on down the trunk. Now you will get to the end of your first wire bottoms as you move on down, but that's absolutely fine. What you might want to do is have a slightly separate trunk coming over to one side, so that's a little bit more twisted over at the top there, so I'm just going to pop that on the side. It's all completely within your remit how you want your particular tree to appear. So I've got 2 or 3 more to add in. Some of these are quite dinky. You can keep them all exactly the same if you wish to. So all I'm doing is constantly twisting in the same direction and just adding more as I move down. I'm already starting to kind of design how this tree is going to shape up. 2 more to do. So there's 1 just coming in on this side. Do definitely need to give that a bit of a firm twist. And then this last one I think I'm going to put on the rear, like so. So because that's quite a short section of twisting at the top, I'm just going to elongate that section first, because I want it to come out as a separate branch. So there's this bare patch on the back of the tree here, which I'm going to fill with this trifoliate selection. So I'm going to pop that where I think it will look nice, and then start winding that around. It's quite tough now. So again, you have the option, once that's all nice and firmly tied up, if you want it to be freestanding, you can just splay those roots out. Always being mindful of your fingertips. We don't want any injuries when we're making trees. So I'm just going to very, very roughly open them up so you can see the idea from overhead. You would obviously want to make that look a little bit more attractive. You can again kind of reflect the tree above with the tree below. You can pop some little shapes on there if you like. It's entirely up to you. Again, that can sit through a hole. What I think I might do is drill my wooden coaster, put the trunk through and have the root system underneath the wood so it looks like it's growing out of the top there. And then you've got all the fun of forming your own tree exactly how you want it to appear. So this is fairly rapid, again, fairly quickly made. You can obviously make this as large or as small as you want. If you wanted a much longer tree root system, then just up the length of the wire from that sort of 10-11 inches or so up to 14 or 15 inches, and you can make a much more large tree. As an alternative to adding your base to a rock or into Oasis or a cork, for instance, I'm just going to show you very, very quickly how you could add the base of a tree that you've brought together onto a heavy wire frame. So if you'd like to join me down at the board, this is what I've just created. This is in some 14 gauge or 1.6mm wire. And what we're going to do is just imagine that these offcuts are coming away from the bottom of a tree. So if I very, very quickly just turn a loop at the top, that's our not very good tree. What I'm going to do is generate the trunk coming down like so, and then we've got these tails of wire coming away. And they can all come out in opposite directions, as we did as if they were going to stand on a pebble or be glued in position. We're just going to open these out so that they all sit at the same level. And I'm just using the 6 offcuts from the preceding design, like so. You've got your tree sitting up in the middle, and then we would just take those tails and wrap them around a frame that we've created. Now, when you've got multiple wires coming down, it doesn't matter that your end here is not secured to the frame, because the more wires you add on to that, the more stable it will become. So this is an example at the base here of how this will work, but I just wanted to show you that one as well. So I would probably start off with one on the uncut section, and I just wrap around both of those external wires. You could use a bangle for this if you have one that has a beginning, no beginning and no end. That also works. Really, really useful if you've got some old junk jewellery lying around, you don't know what to do with it, but you don't want to throw it away. Bangles are great for making tree bases. So I'm just going to take that tail and tuck that away underneath. You can obviously spend a little bit more time to make that nice and neat and tidy. The next thing I would do is come directly opposite, so that what we get is the tension on that tree system. Wrap that tail all the way around, and I will go for as many wraps as I can possibly fit. The more wires you have in the trunk of your tree, the less space you will have on this outer framework. So I would say at least 6 wraps, but if you want to go for more, then do indeed go for more. And I'll just bring that tail up and into position. Now, if this gets baggy and loose, what you can do is, if it's a round wire that you've used, you can just gently open that out, like so. Another alternative to take up space, if you've used a square frame, is you can do this zigzagging, which just adds a little bit of interest to that root system and stops it from being baggy. So that's just a different way that you can bring your tree to a stable base. So you can push that up slightly. You can even put a nice rock underneath that and set it onto one of those coasters that we had earlier. So that's just an alternative way of setting the base of your tree. So there's the second of our very, very quick to build trees. The next one I'm going to show you is an upside down tree. So this has no gemstones, although you can add them if you wish to. But what it does is build out of the root system first. So I'm going to use a cork. You could use any other sort of variations. You could even use Oasis sponge if you found a really, really firm one, which of course you could then decoupage or similar, paint it, whatever you want to do. The world is your oyster with these designs. I really love making trees. So this is our third tree. Now for this particular sample piece, I've used 2 different techniques to create interesting leaves. This is more tendril form blossom, and this is a little bit more petite leaf or early unbloomed ends of your trees. It's entirely up to you how you design that. What you can see here is that the trunk has got a lot more fascination than the two we've already created today. This actually, I think, is my favourite way. It uses a lot more wire than you think you will need. So we'll be using again the 0.4mm or 26 gauge, but we will need quite a lot of those lengths, around about 12 inches. So this is a cork from a celebration bottle, and I'm going to show you a much more slender variation of this, but the technique will be exactly the same. So if I just pop this up into the corner, I've got myself some longish lengths of the 0.4 or 26 gauge raw copper wire, and I'm just going to work with 6 of them. For this piece there's around about 40 wires. So just pop that up in the corner. You can of course add any writing or painting that you so desire. Here's the cork that I'm going to use to demonstrate with you. Now, not all corks are created equally. Some are very, very firm. And if that's the case, it might not be the right cork for you. So what I would do is just straighten the base of the wires that I'm going to use. And I'd take a handful, maybe about 6 at a time. Make sure they're all side by side. And that bottom ½ inch, the very, very end ½ inch, I'm just going to squish, making sure they're not crossing over. You could do this one at a time if you preferred. I'm just adding a little bit of hardness to those wires. This means that when I try to poke this into the cork, and you may like to do this with a pair of flat facing pliers, starting with a very, very small amount, I'm just going to see if that goes in. That's actually going in really nicely. I wondered for a moment if this cork was going to be too hard. And we want to bury a good ½ inch of wire into the cork, and each time I add a wire I'm just going to push that up and away so there's a nice right angle. So here's the next one. Again, hold it relatively close to the end of your wire there, because what will happen if your cork is very, very firm is that the wire will wrinkle. You might need to do this in some small steps. So you can see there, that's what commonly happens. You do get a little bit of a wrinkle in the wire. So you can either withdraw it, straighten the wire, or you can just continue on until you've got enough actually inside the cork. So if you're creating for other people, I would say bring that wire out and go back in again. So starting off by hand can sometimes help, but definitely pre-strengthen that wire before you start to slide that into position. Now you can go slightly further in if you wish to, but as long as you get a good ½ inch grip in there. So what I'm going to do is 3 on the one side and 3 on the other side, but you will absolutely want to fill all the way around. You can see that this is quite a diminutive tree. You don't want anything too heavy. I would say 40 wires is probably the maximum, because otherwise your cork may topple. So I'm going to put the other 3 wires on the other side just to replicate how to bring all those wires together. So just the very end section has gone in. And if it is a little bit tricky, it's a bit like camping. Sometimes the pegs go in and sometimes they don't. Just get as much as you can in, and if it really goes wrong, take it out, cut the end off, start again. If you don't have enough wire left over, it's just one out of many. So a little bit of hardness in the end there. And move this one further round, give that a push in. You can start with the pliers or get it started and then use the pliers. And that's one has been very tricky. And honestly, it is. It's very much like camping. So this one hasn't gone in far enough to be stable. So I'm going to take that out, trim the excess away, reharden that end section. Now I'm not squashing it flat, but I am giving it a relatively good squeeze there. I'm going to move that over by a very small amount so it doesn't go back in through the same hole. And that's much, much more satisfactory now. I'm giving that a really good squeeze in home and then draw that wire up and away. And then for the last one, for our very, very slender demonstration tree, I'm going to pop that in the gap over here. So I've just started that off and then going to slide that all the way home. There we go, that's perfect. So if I bring that up, what you will do, very, very careful so that you don't pull the wires out and away, start bringing them up to the centre. Now obviously a bundle of 40 wires looks quite significantly different to this. What you need to do is to support the top of the cork like so, and just start to bring that together and twist that around. So that's a really nice neat start. It's not necessarily in the centre, but that's absolutely fine. What I need to do is get a good strong base just here. What you don't want to do is start twisting so tightly that you begin to draw the wires back out of the cork. So as you have more wires in your piece, what you'll find is you can just very, very gently move up and move up and move up, and then really grip down at the base. The more you tighten this section with heavier wires, it will start to want to twist around by itself. So a lot of that shaping is actually quite natural, and it's part of the over twisting of the wire. Now, when you see me opening and closing the pliers on a bundle of wire like this, I am not crushing the wire. What can happen is that you will shatter one or two of the outer wires, and then you will lose your work. Obviously you can rescue it if you've got 40 or 50 wires going on and you break one. It's not the end of the world. So you can shape your tree trunk as you go up. You can have quite a twisty one, or as we did with the tiny examples at the beginning, you can have a more kind of straight trunk. It's entirely up to you. So we've gone for quite a wispy one here. And what I think I might do is, because what will happen when you have more wire, as they twist around, it will shrink down because it comes further away from the central pole, and you end up with a slightly shorter tree. So that is why I would suggest using quite a long segment of wire, around about sort of 14-15 inches or so. So what I'm going to do for the sake of demonstration is just trim away these end sections and ask you to imagine that we've got quite close to the top now. So as I get close to the height that I'm looking to complete at, I'm going to start bringing branches away. And what I would do is bring bundles of around about 7 or 8 wires. Doesn't always have to be the same number. So I'm going to show you with just a couple here. Just try and keep the top slightly straight so that you can access wires that come away at the same kind of height. What can happen is if you grab a wire from this side and a wire from this side, it doesn't look quite as attractive. So I'm going to take these first 2 and start creating a branch. Or there's 3 of them. I'm going to take these first 3 and start creating a branch that's coming over to this side. And then your trunk can carry on its merry way up a little bit further. You can take that out to the side if you like. I'm going to bring this branch down slightly. So you'll have many offshoots as you move up the trunk of your tree. And I'll show you the 2 different techniques with these. As I start working towards the ends of the wires, you'll start having number issues. So what I would like to do is, because I've got 3 on this branch here, I'll take 2 together, continue to twist in the same direction so you don't undo your work. And I'm going to create a little bit of a lower branch just popping down there. And then this one, very carefully just smooth that away. So once you've decided that your branch is as long as you need it to be, I'm going to separate my wires and look at the length. Now at this stage, I'll only need about sort of 2 inches or so. So I'm just going to trim the tree. It's the only time I've ever been an arborealist. Now there are 2 techniques that I want to show you. So for the first branch, what I'm going to do is generate a coil. So quite close to the end of my round nose pliers, draw that around. Once I've got the start of the coil going, I will switch to my flat facing pliers, and I'll start coiling the wire around the outside of that central circle shape that we made. So we've done coiling in heavier wire many times. We may not have covered coiling in a lighter wire. It's very, very gently moving that coil along the length of the wire. Now I particularly like this design because you can use it in multiples of ways. So I'm going to draw the coil almost to the end of the branch. What you need to do is just be gentle, and then you won't have too many snappages. So I draw this wire out of the way for a second. What I'm going to do is to create a little upward coil, almost like a helter-skelter, like so. So it's just opening up like a spring. And that is how you'll get the multiple effects. The more you have, the more beautiful it will look. So for the second technique that I want to show you, which is like the dropping blossom, I would use my bail making pliers. Whatever size you think will work best. I think I might try with the second size on these ones. So starting off and then rotating down. So you can see that the base of the wire, the end of the wire there, is coming down the shaft of the bail makers. If you're very careful, you can do this in the opposite direction on your round nose pliers, but I strongly recommend getting yourself some multi-step bail makers. These are fabulous beadle-on ones. So once I've created a spring that's the same size all the way along, I prefer to do this with finger and thumb. You could use the tip of your pliers if you prefer. So I've just opened the spring so that it drops down and away from the tree. By themselves, they don't look overly impressive, but once you start clustering them up, it's a really lovely effect that you can use. So that's how we would create the cork-based tree. Now, if you wanted to, you could have gemstones supported on the end of those, but I would recommend something that's quite light, maybe some opal chips or some amber chips, something like that. You would need to be very, very delicate not to overload the cork. Of course, you can have that coming out of Oasis, which, as I said earlier, you could maybe decoupage or paint even. So that's just a couple of freestanding tree designs, which I adore making, and they seem to always go, if I take them to craft fairs, they'll kind of disappear. It's a nice gift to give to somebody, I think, especially if it's a cork from their wedding day. Have yourself a beautiful afternoon, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon. Bye for now.